The world froze in disbelief on August 31, 1997, as news spread of Princess Diana's tragic car accident in Paris. It was a moment that felt impossible to grasp. How could someone so vibrant, beloved, and influential be gone in an instant? The shock reverberated globally, with a profound sense of loss gripping not just Britain, but millions across continents. Diana was more than a princess. She was a symbol of compassion, an icon of hope, and a bridge between the monarchy and the people. Her death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a moment that redefined the public's relationship with the royal family. How did the royal family adapt to the public's grief? What challenges shaped the farewell of the people's princess? And how did her sons endure such loss under the world's gaze? Let's uncover the untold truths of Diana's final goodbye. In Paris, the aftermath of the crash was chaotic. Emergency responders worked tirelessly to save her, but the severity of her injuries was insurmountable. By the time Diana arrived at Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, the medical team could do little more than announce the unthinkable. The Princess of Wales had succumbed to her injuries. As the news broke in the early hours of the morning, the world collectively held its breath, struggling to process the magnitude of what had just happened. In Britain, the sun rose to scenes of quiet devastation. Early risers tuning into the news were met with solemn broadcasts, each network suspending regular programming to cover Diana's death. The streets outside Buckingham and Kensington palaces, usually serene on a Sunday morning, quickly became focal points of public grief. Florists struggled to keep up with demand as mourners rushed to lay bouquets, notes, and candles in memory of the princess. Within hours, what started as a trickle became a flood, with thousands gathering to pay their respects. While the public mourned openly, the royal family's initial response was starkly different. At Balmoral Castle, where they had been staying, they remained silent, shielded behind the estate's ancient walls. The Queen's decision to prioritize her grandson's emotional well-being over immediate public appearances would later be fiercely debated. To some, it was a mark of strength and dedication to family. To others, it was perceived as coldness, a stark contrast to the warmth Diana embodied. The media, already under fire for their relentless pursuit of Diana, seized on this disparity, further fueling the public's frustration with the monarchy. Behind the scenes, government and palace officials faced an unprecedented challenge, organizing a funeral for a royal figure who had broken so many traditions. Diana wasn't just a princess, she was a global icon, beloved by ordinary citizens and international leaders alike. The existing plans for royal funerals, including the Queen Mother's meticulously crafted Taybridge plan, were too formal and detached to reflect Diana's unique connection to the people. Yet, there was little time to create something entirely new. A delicate balance had to be struck, one that honored Diana's royal status while acknowledging her extraordinary public appeal. As the days passed, the scale of the public's mourning became undeniable. Vigils sprang up not just in London, but across the UK and around the world. In Paris, the tunnel where the crash occurred became an impromptu shrine, with visitors leaving flowers, photographs, and heartfelt messages. The Eiffel Tower, often a symbol of celebration, stood illuminated in solemn tribute. Diana's death had transcended borders, touching hearts in ways rarely seen before. By September 1st, discussions about the funeral were in full swing. Prime Minister Tony Blair, who had famously referred to Diana as the People's Princess in an emotional speech, worked closely with the royal family and Diana's brother, Earl Spencer. It was decided that Westminster Abbey would host the service, a venue steeped in royal history, but also large enough to accommodate the thousands expected to attend. The decision underscored the significance of Diana's life and death, placing her in a setting usually reserved for monarchs and heads of state. Meanwhile, the streets of London braced for what would be one of the largest gatherings in modern history. Authorities anticipated millions of mourners lining the procession route, and logistics teams worked tirelessly to ensure everything ran smoothly. Security was a paramount concern given the presence of world leaders and high-profile celebrities. Every detail, from the placement of barriers to the timing of the cortege, was scrutinized to ensure the day honored Diana without incident. Amid this whirlwind of planning, Diana's sons, William and Harry, faced the heartbreaking reality of their loss. Only 15 and 12 years old at the time, they were thrust into a spotlight no child should have to endure. While the public saw them as symbols of strength during those early days, behind closed doors, they were grieving sons trying to make sense of their new world. Their presence at the funeral would become one of the most poignant images of the day, a reminder of the human cost of Diana's death. As September 5th approached, the weight of the moment began to settle on everyone involved. For the royal family, it was a test of their ability to adapt in the face of unprecedented public scrutiny. For Diana's family, it was a chance to celebrate her life while grappling with the reality of her absence. And for the public, it was an opportunity to say goodbye to a woman who had, in many ways, redefined what it meant to be royal. By the evening before the funeral, the streets around Westminster Abbey were filled with mourners camping overnight, desperate to secure a place along the procession route. The air was heavy with emotion, as strangers shared stories of how Diana had touched their lives. Whether it was her work with AIDS patients, her campaigns against landmines, or her ability to connect with ordinary people, everyone had a memory of Diana that felt deeply personal. The night gave way to dawn, and as the city prepared for the funeral, a sense of collective anticipation hung in the air. It was clear that this was more than a royal ceremony. It was a moment of cultural significance, a turning point that would shape the way the world remembered Diana and the monarchy for years to come. As the morning of September 6, 1997 arrived, London was cloaked in an air of solemnity. The streets, usually bustling with activity, were instead lined with rows of mourners who had gathered overnight. Many clutched flowers, photographs, and handwritten notes, while others stood silently, their faces etched with grief. The anticipation of what lay ahead was palpable, and the city seemed to move in slow motion as the world prepared to bid farewell to Princess Diana. In the early hours, final preparations were underway at Kensington Palace, where Diana's coffin had been lying in a private chapel. Draped in the royal standard and adorned with an arrangement of white lilies, her casket stood as a symbol of both tradition and the deep personal loss felt by her family. Atop it lay a heartbreaking tribute from her sons, a card addressed simply as, "Mummy." The simplicity of the gesture captured the profound humanity of the moment, contrasting sharply with the grandeur of the royal protocols surrounding it. The cortege began its journey from Kensington Palace, winding through the streets of London toward Westminster Abbey. A procession of black cars moved slowly, each step of the way accompanied by the muffled sound of hooves on cobblestone and the steady rhythm of military drummers. The atmosphere was heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional sound of quiet sobs from the crowd. Some mourners threw flowers onto the road as the cortege passed, creating a trail of petals that seemed to guide Diana on her final journey. Walking behind the coffin were 5 figures whose presence would become one of the most enduring images of the day. Diana's sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, their father, Prince Charles, their grandfather, Prince Philip, and Diana's brother, Charles, Earl Spencer. For the young princes, the walk was an unimaginable test of strength. Their faces, pale and solemn, revealed a quiet dignity that belied their tender ages. Prince Philip, known for his steadfast composure, walked alongside them, a gesture of unwavering support that spoke volumes about the familial bonds behind the royal facade. The sight of the 2 boys walking behind their mother's coffin struck a deep chord with onlookers. Many wept openly, their grief compounded by the thought of the loss these young princes would carry for the rest of their lives. Diana had always been a devoted mother, and in that moment, the world seemed united in its heartbreak for the sons she had left behind. Later, both William and Harry would reflect on this experience, acknowledging the immense difficulty of that day, but also the sense of duty that drove them to honor their mother in such a public way. As the procession approached Westminster Abbey, the towering spires of the historic church loomed large against the gray morning sky. The Abbey, steeped in centuries of royal history, had never hosted a funeral quite like this. Diana's status as a royal figure was undeniable, but her connection to the public had transcended her title. She was the people's princess, and her funeral needed to reflect the profound bond she had shared with ordinary people. Inside the Abbey, the mood was equally somber. The pews were filled with a mix of royalty, global leaders and celebrities, a testament to Diana's far-reaching impact. Among the notable attendees were figures like Hillary Clinton, Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, and Elton John, each of whom had been touched by Diana in different ways. The blend of high-profile figures and the more traditional royal entourage underscored the unique nature of Diana's life and the complexities of her legacy. The service began with the haunting strains of classical music, chosen to reflect both Diana's love of the arts and the gravity of the occasion. The hymns, prayers, and readings were carefully selected, blending royal tradition with the personal touches that made Diana's funeral distinct. One of the most poignant moments came when Elton John performed "Candle in the Wind," a reimagined version of his 1973 hit originally written for Marilyn Monroe. With lyrics rewritten by Bernie Taupin to honor Diana as England's Rose, the performance was both heart-wrenching and unforgettable. Elton, visibly emotional, delivered the song with a raw vulnerability that resonated deeply with everyone present. The eulogy delivered by Earl Spencer was another defining moment of the service. Standing before the assembled congregation, he spoke with a mix of grief and defiance, celebrating Diana's compassion while taking pointed aim at the media and, some believed, the royal family. He described his sister as the most hunted person of the modern age, a line that drew murmurs of agreement and applause from those gathered outside the abbey. His words were a stark reminder of the relentless pressure Diana had faced throughout her life, even as she sought to use her platform to make a difference in the world. Beyond the abbey walls, the crowd outside listened intently to the service through loudspeakers, their emotions mirroring those inside. Many wept during the readings and hymns, their collective grief creating a sense of unity among strangers. The atmosphere was a mix of reverence and raw emotion, as people from all walks of life came together to honor a woman who had touched their hearts in ways they couldn't fully articulate. As the service drew to a close, the coffin was carried out of the abbey to the sound of a solemn orchestral piece. The pallbearers, members of the Welsh Guards, moved with practiced precision, their faces betraying the weight of their responsibility. The abbey's great doors swung open, revealing the sea of mourners who had waited hours to catch a final glimpse of Diana. Many threw flowers as the coffin passed, their gestures creating a cascade of color that seemed to bid her farewell. The journey from Westminster Abbey to Althorp, Diana's final resting place, was one of quiet reflection. The streets of London gave way to the English countryside, where the rolling fields and quiet lanes provided a stark contrast to the morning's somber grandeur. For those traveling with the cortege, it was a chance to shift from public mourning to private grief, as the reality of Diana's absence began to settle in. By the time the cortege reached Althorp, the weight of the day had taken its toll on everyone involved. The final moments of Diana's journey were marked by a profound stillness, as her family and close friends gathered to say their goodbyes. The public had paid their respects, the world had mourned, and now, in the quiet of the Spencer estate, Diana would find peace. As the cortege departed Westminster Abbey, the weight of the ceremony lingered heavily on the hearts of those who had witnessed it. The streets of London, still crowded with mourners, became silent once more as Diana's final journey began. The profound sense of loss shared by millions seemed to crystallize in the quiet dignity of the procession. From the grandeur of the abbey to the intimate destination of Althorp, the day transitioned from public mourning to a deeply personal farewell. The route through London was lined with countless mourners who had gathered not just to say goodbye, but to pay their respects to a woman who had redefined what it meant to be royal. Some clapped gently as the hearse passed, while others wept openly. A palpable sense of unity bound the crowds together, as strangers exchanged knowing glances and shared tissues. Among the sea of flowers being thrown onto the path, handwritten notes fluttered in the breeze, carrying messages of gratitude, love, and sorrow. The journey to Althorp was both symbolic and solemn. Diana's coffin, still draped in the royal standard, traveled through the countryside she had loved so much during her life. For those inside the cortege, the shift in scenery was stark. The densely packed streets of London gave way to rolling green fields and quiet villages, a fitting backdrop for the princess who had so often sought solace in nature. The procession moved slowly, allowing time for reflection, a rare pause in an otherwise overwhelming day. For William and Harry, the journey to Althorpe marked a turning point. No longer surrounded by throngs of mourners or the relentless gaze of the cameras, they began to transition into a space where their grief could be more private. The brothers had borne the weight of the world's expectations throughout the day, their every move scrutinized and immortalized. Now, in the confines of their family's estate, they could begin to process the enormity of their loss without the burden of performing their grief. The cortege arrived at Althorpe as the afternoon light softened into the golden hues of evening. The Spencer estate, a sprawling property steeped in history, had been Diana's childhood home, and it was here that her brother Charles, Earl Spencer, had chosen to lay her to rest. The decision to bury Diana on the family's private island known as the Oval was both practical and symbolic. It offered a sanctuary away from public intrusion, a place where William and Harry could visit their mother in peace. Yet the choice was not without controversy, as some felt Diana's burial site should have been more accessible to the public who loved her so deeply. The private ceremony at Althorpe was a stark contrast to the grandeur of Westminster Abbey. Gathered on the island were only Diana's closest family and friends, a small group of individuals bound together by their shared love and loss. The simplicity of the ceremony reflected Diana's own preferences for authenticity over pomp. There were no cameras, no reporters, only the quiet murmur of the priest's words and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. The setting itself was poignant. The island, encircled by a tranquil lake and shaded by ancient trees, had been chosen for its beauty and serenity. It was a place that Diana herself had cherished, and her burial there felt deeply personal. Her grave, marked with a simple white memorial stone, stood in stark contrast to the ornate tombs of other royals, further emphasizing her unique connection to the people. Nearby, trees planted by Diana, William, and Harry during happier times served as silent witnesses to her final rest. As Diana's coffin was lowered into the ground, her family gathered for their final goodbyes. The moment was raw and intimate, with each person saying their own silent farewell. For Earl Spencer, it was a culmination of the responsibilities he had shouldered since Diana's death. His eulogy at the Abbey had been both a tribute and a call to action, a promise to protect Diana's legacy and her sons from the pressures that had plagued her life. Now, as he stood at her graveside, the enormity of that promise loomed large. The private nature of Diana's burial was a conscious choice, designed to shield her family from further scrutiny. Yet, in the weeks that followed, the decision sparked debate. Some mourners traveled to Althorpe, hoping to pay their respects, only to find that the island was off-limits to visitors. Others criticized the estate's decision to open the grounds to the public for tours, questioning whether this commercialized Diana's memory. Despite the controversy, Earl Spencer remained firm in his belief that Althorpe was the right place for his sister to rest, citing the peace and security it offered. The burial ceremony may have marked the end of Diana's physical journey, but it was clear that her impact would resonate far beyond that quiet island. In the days that followed, tributes continued to pour in from around the world. Letters, flowers, and donations to Diana's favorite charities flooded in, reflecting the profound influence she had had on people's lives. Her legacy as a humanitarian, a style icon, and a devoted mother became the focal points of countless articles, broadcasts, and conversations. Back in London, the floral tributes outside Kensington Palace began to dwindle, but their presence left an indelible mark on those who had seen them. The sheer volume of flowers, estimated at over 1 million bouquets, had transformed the palace grounds into a sea of color and fragrance. For many, it was a powerful visual representation of the public's love for Diana and their grief at her loss. As the sun set on the day of Diana's funeral, a quiet sense of closure began to settle over the nation. The rituals of the day, from the solemn procession to the intimate burial, had provided a framework for collective mourning. Yet, for those closest to Diana, the journey of grief was far from over. The world had said goodbye, but the memory of her warmth, her courage, and her humanity would continue to shape their lives in profound ways. The significance of that day extended far beyond the funeral itself. It was a moment that forced the monarchy to reevaluate its relationship with the public, a turning point that would shape royal protocol for years to come. It was also a testament to the enduring power of compassion, a reminder that even in the face of profound loss, the bonds of humanity could bring people together. The days following Diana's funeral were marked by a strange stillness, as though the world itself was catching its breath after the enormity of the loss. London, which had thrummed with activity in the lead-up to September 6th, seemed subdued. The makeshift memorials of flowers, cards, and candles outside Kensington and Buckingham Palaces began to thin, though the scent of blooms still lingered in the air, a poignant reminder of the outpouring of love and grief. At Althorp, the Spencer family adjusted to the reality of Diana's presence on the estate, not as the lively young girl who had once run through its halls, but as a memory now enshrined in the serene quiet of the Oval. The island where Diana was buried became a place of profound significance, a sanctuary shielded from the prying eyes of the world. For Earl Spencer, the decision to lay his sister to rest there carried both comfort and responsibility. He had wanted to ensure that her final resting place was private, a location that could offer peace and protection from the relentless scrutiny that had defined so much of her life. The days after the burial were not without controversy. The Spencer family's choice of a secluded site left many feeling excluded, particularly those who had poured their hearts into public tributes. In London, where crowds had spent days outside royal residences, there was a sense of unfinished mourning. People wanted a place to connect with Diana, to leave their respects, to find closure. Althorp, though beautiful, was inaccessible to most. For some, this decision felt like a barrier between Diana and the people she had loved so deeply. To address these concerns, the Spencers made Althorp's grounds partially available to the public during certain times of the year. Visitors could tour the estate, learning about its history and Diana's connection to the land. A temple was built on the lakeshore, housing an exhibition dedicated to her life and humanitarian work. While the decision helped bridge the gap, it also drew criticism from those who saw it as commodifying Diana's memory. Earl Spencer, however, maintained that the measures were taken to honor his sister's legacy while preserving the sanctity of her burial site. Meanwhile, the royal family faced its own reckoning. The Queen's decision to remain at Balmoral in the immediate aftermath of Diana's death had drawn sharp criticism, with some accusing her of being out of touch with the public's grief. However, her actions on the day of the funeral, the Union flag flying at half-mast above Buckingham Palace and her public bow as Diana's coffin passed, had helped to rebuild bridges. These gestures, while seemingly simple, carried immense weight, signaling a shift in the monarchy's approach to public sentiment. For William and Harry, the days after their mother's funeral were bittersweet. The outpouring of love and support from people around the world was deeply moving, but it also underscored the loss they were grappling with privately. Diana had been more than their mother. She had been their confidant, their champion, and their greatest source of unconditional love. As the media coverage of the funeral began to subside, the young princes retreated into the privacy of Balmoral, where they could begin the slow process of healing. The impact of Diana's funeral reverberated beyond her immediate family. It became a watershed moment in the way the public grieved, setting a new precedent for collective mourning in the modern era. The overwhelming public response to her death, from the sheer volume of flowers to the global broadcasts of the funeral, highlighted the deep connection people had felt with her. This connection wasn't just about her royal status, it was about her humanity. Diana had shown the world that royalty didn't have to mean distance. It could mean empathy, warmth, and vulnerability. This shift had lasting implications for the royal family, who began to adapt to a new reality, where public perception mattered more than ever. The monarchy, once a symbol of tradition and stoic detachment, began to embrace a more relatable image. The lessons learned from Diana's funeral influenced everything from public engagements to the handling of future royal events. When the Queen Mother passed away in 2002, her funeral was imbued with elements that had resonated so strongly during Diana's service: accessibility, public involvement, and a recognition of the emotional connection between the royals and the people. Diana's influence extended far beyond the realm of royalty. Her funeral became a cultural touchstone, inspiring new conversations about the media's role in the lives of public figures. Earl Spencer's eulogy, in which he condemned the press for its relentless pursuit of his sister, struck a chord with many. It prompted a re-evaluation of how celebrities were treated and sparked debates about the ethics of tabloid journalism. While these conversations didn't lead to immediate change, they planted seeds for a broader reckoning in the years to come. Charities and organizations associated with Diana saw a surge in support following her death as people sought ways to honor her legacy. From AIDS research to campaigns against landmines, the causes she had championed became focal points for donations and activism. Diana's funeral had not only celebrated her life, but also reignited the public's commitment to the values she had embodied: compassion, courage, and a relentless desire to make the world a better place. In the months that followed, the royal family and the Spencers found themselves navigating the delicate balance of preserving Diana's memory while moving forward. For Earl Spencer, this meant ensuring that Althorp remained a fitting tribute to his sister, a place where her legacy could be both celebrated and protected. For the royal family, it meant finding ways to integrate the lessons of Diana's life into their own roles, particularly for William and Harry, who carried their mother's influence into their adulthood. By the end of 1997, the raw edges of grief had begun to soften, though the pain of Diana's loss remained deeply felt. Her funeral had been more than a farewell. It had been a moment of transformation, a catalyst for change in the royal family, the media, and the public. The world had come together to mourn a woman who had embodied love and kindness, and in doing so, it had redefined what it meant to say goodbye. For the royal family, Diana's funeral marked the beginning of a new chapter. The unprecedented public reaction had been a wake-up call, highlighting the need for a more open and accessible monarchy. The Queen, who had faced sharp criticism in the days following Diana's death, gradually adjusted to the evolving expectations of her role. Her decision to lower the Union flag at half-mast had been a symbolic departure from tradition, but it also signaled a willingness to adapt. In the years that followed, the monarchy embraced a more personal approach, with members of the royal family engaging in more direct and emotional connections with the public. William and Harry, still teenagers when they lost their mother, grew up in the shadow of her memory. Diana's influence was evident in the choices they made as they matured. Both brothers pursued causes close to their mother's heart, from mental health advocacy to supporting vulnerable communities. William, in his role as the future king, adopted Diana's approachable style, often breaking royal protocol to connect with people on a personal level. Harry, inspired by Diana's humanitarian spirit, championed causes like veterans' welfare and environmental conservation. Their shared commitment to honoring Diana's legacy became a defining feature of their public lives. Diana's funeral also left an indelible mark on the way society approached grief. The outpouring of emotion that followed her death broke through barriers of stiff upper lip tradition, particularly in Britain. It demonstrated that collective mourning could be cathartic, a way for people to find solace in shared humanity. This shift influenced public responses to future tragedies, such as the 9/11 attacks and natural disasters, where expressions of grief and solidarity became more visible and widely accepted. The media, too, faced its own moment of reflection. Earl Spencer's pointed critique during his eulogy had struck a nerve, exposing the darker side of tabloid culture. While the paparazzi's relentless pursuit of Diana had been widely criticized before her death, his words brought the issue to the forefront of public consciousness. Although change was slow, discussions around privacy and ethical journalism began to gain traction. Over time, the rise of social media added new complexities to these conversations. But Diana's story remained a cautionary tale of the human cost of media intrusion. Globally, Diana's legacy as a humanitarian continued to grow. The charities she had championed saw a surge in support in the months after her funeral, with donations pouring in from around the world. Her work with AIDS patients, a cause she had fearlessly embraced at a time of widespread stigma, became a cornerstone of her memory. The iconic image of Diana shaking hands with an AIDS patient, challenging misconceptions and prejudices, was revisited countless times in the years following her death. Similarly, Her campaign against landmines, immortalized in images of her walking through a minefield in Angola, became a rallying point for continued advocacy and change. Althorpe, Diana's final resting place, became a site of quiet pilgrimage for those seeking to pay their respects. Though the island where she was buried remained off-limits to visitors, the exhibition and temple on the estate allowed people to connect with her story. The lake surrounding the oval served as a serene and fitting tribute, its still waters reflecting the enduring impact of Diana's life. For Earl Spencer, preserving this space was both a privilege and a responsibility, a way to ensure that his sister's memory would be safeguarded for future generations. In the years that followed, Diana's presence was felt in moments both big and small. Her influence could be seen in the way her sons raised their own families, with an emphasis on love, compassion, and mental well-being. It was present in the way public figures began to approach their roles, with greater vulnerability and openness. And it was evident in the countless tributes, from documentaries and books to charities and public memorials, that celebrated her life. Even decades later, Diana's story continues to resonate. Her life, marked by triumphs and challenges, and her untimely death, remain a lens through which the world examines issues of compassion, duty, and humanity. The lessons of her funeral, the importance of acknowledging grief, the power of community, and the need to adapt in the face of change, are as relevant today as they were in 1997. With that, we have reached the end of today's show. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.